My name is Mehran Hatami and I'm a JavaScript developer with 12 years of experience. I really like what I do. And as a JavaScript developer, and I also like to to share what I've learned during all these years. We have had one session around 2 weeks ago, and this is the second session today, which is about understanding the React component state and lifestyle. So I guess the naming is not that clear. It should have been React component lifestyle and those parts and states, state object, the way that state object works in every single step of this lifestyle method. So, okay, let's go through my notes, and I have also created an application for to cover all the topics that we are going to cover in this session. So, as you all know, as I just said, we are going to be focused mostly around life cycle of React components and how component state is set up and works in every single step of life cycle. You could find these links. These are the links that I have used to just to take my notes. But before we get started, before we dig into the interesting part, which is about lifecycle, I just want to have a quick review. About React basics. Sorry guys, you all can hear me, but my headphone is not plugged in. I just found out. I guess that was the issue. I guess if you don't have any problems, let's go with this solution then. Is everything okay? Okay, sorry. Okay, what is React? You all know what is React, but the point that matters about React is React helps us to develop complex user interfaces with datasets that changes over time. Whenever we have a dataset that changes over time, we usually have to keep something, some kind of object in our application, and something that we usually call state object. And this is, changing over time is in front-end development is considered as the root of all evil. Okay, so the point about React, what makes React different is we all know that it uses virtual DOM, and it doesn't, without us having to deal with DOM manipulation and to do stuff like that, we could just use React, and it's, the render function of every single component helps us to render every all of the components in every single change. So without us having being worried about if it takes a lot of memory or stuff like that. So, but I find this example interesting. I have created this example just to give you guys some kind of just to have a better understanding of what we are talking about. What I'm going to do is just to copy this whole code and open Stack Overflow, open the developer console, and paste the code over here. Just before I hit the enter, I want to just take a quick look into what I have in my code here. So what we have, just these questions is just let's say it is the actual object that we store all the questions in the current page of the Stack Overflow. So we have two questions right now. For instance, view counts are 1 and 11. Just as an example, we have increment views count, a function which receives the index of the question and changes all the information that needs to be changed. For instance, what it does, it goes and first it has to check if question data is available, if question index is valid. So second, what it does, it goes into the DOM and selects the question summary section that finds the question element in the page. In this case, it would be right here around a div element around all these parts. So every single question has this question summary element. So, and the other thing is inside that question element there is a span element again, which has this count number in it. So if we want to, for instance, increment that number, we could just read that from the DOM, right, the way that we could do it right here. You could find that here. And if we don't if we already have the last views count in our object, we could use that. But if we don't have it, we have to parse string to number so that we could increment. So let's see if this function and after this after we add this here, we have to then again update the data, which is our state object in this case, and also update the DOM. This is when I say DOM manipulation, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You have to go through the DOM, you have to update elements, you have to select stuff in your page, and now let's just hit enter. Okay, now we have a function called increment. Okay, this is a function. So as you see here, it has two views. Okay, let's see. As you see now, it has three views. Okay, questions, numbers. As you see, it also has views count number 3, which means this works. So if we want to change it to number 1, again it works. Now it has 18 views. So question number 1, and the data is also synced with what we see in the application. So using React, we no longer need to be worried about that. So React is all about components. I guess I wanted just to give you a quick review of all the issues that we used to have dealing with DOM manipulation, and also a big picture about React. Okay, let's go to my second note. We are here to talk about the component lifecycle. Each component, as we know, has several lifecycle methods that you can override to run your code at any particular time in the process. So there are some keywords like will and did. Whenever we see, we find a lifecycle method has this will prefix, it means that that function is called right before something, or the function is being called right before something that actually is going to be happen. Something like, for instance, component is going to be mounted or is going to be updated. And the same also applies for did. Methods prefixed with did are called right after something happens. After updating the component, we have did. Component did mount. Okay, so or the component did update. So let's just go through this picture. So I have this picture here, and I really think this is going to be helpful. I am going to just take step by go through this step by step. This is a starting point. React DOM render. This is where everything gets started. First thing that happens is this is the initialization part, which is the first part is to load the component and all of its static properties, And we have two static properties which are really important. One is default props, and the other one is initial state. Using ES6 syntax, we no longer have to use these functions like this, because we could use static properties, and also we could create state inside our constructor, and I'm gonna show you. We are going to get back to this picture later. Let's move on to my third and the main important part. Okay, lifecycle methods. As I just showed you, we have different lifecycle methods, but if we want to categorize these methods, we could categorize them in 4 different sections. One is 4 different phases. One is initialization, as I just told you. The other is mounting, when component is mounted in your browser. Third one is when something gets updated in the component, and the last is unmounting. Okay, I'm not going to go through the explanation that I have put here, but I will get back to this after going through live coding. I just want to have a quick look. Okay, as I just showed you, we have get default props and get initial states as static properties of a component, and which is going to be called in initialization phase. But the main phase is mounting. So the first step in mounting is when your function's constructor is being called. So at this point, so these methods are called when an instance of a component is being created and inserted into the DOM. First, just these numbers are exactly based on the order that they happen. First is constructor. Second is component will mount. 3, render. This is the function that we usually deal with. You could use your component inside. You could put everything that you want inside that render function. And the other one is component did mount. Okay, updating. We are going to cover the other parts of these nodes when we go through live coding, as I just said. The next phase is updating. An update can be caused by changes to props or state. These methods are called when a component is being re-rendered. An existing component is being re-rendered, which means when a component is being mounted, initially is not these functions are not being called, none of them, because an existing already mounted component is able to be updated. Okay, so the first one is component will receive props. Component has been already mounted, and you could change the props. If you change the props, this is going to be called should component update. This is a really interesting lifecycle method. It helps us to prevent the default behavior is whenever something happens in your state or props, re-render is going to be executed, and all the component is going to be updated. But in some cases, we might want to prevent that from happening to have a faster render flow. So if you want to prevent that from happening, what you could do here, you could just check your state and the next state and the next props, and if the next props or next state has something specific, meets a specific criteria, you could return false. But if it doesn't have that criteria, you could return true. If you return true, the process is going to be, continued. But if you return false, the updating process is being to be stopped right here. This the third step, after you return, if you return true, then it goes into component will update. Will not, as you see, the first part is will not be invoked if should component updates returns false. After component will update is called, again, as you see, the render is happening in the fourth step here, and the third step in the mounting process. In the updating process, render happens in the fourth step. And after render, when update happens, now component did update is going to be called, which makes sense because component did update, as its name suggests, it means that some kind of change has happened. Okay, at the end, the last phase is unmounting, which has only one lifecycle method right now, which is component will unmount. So component will unmount happens when the component that you have in your page is going to be, as you have it in its name, unmounted. But at the point that this component, at the point that is that you have this function and this function is being called, the component is already there. But right before it is being, right before it is unmounted, you can do something. For instance, there are some necessary cleanups that we have. If you have a timer, you could clear timeouts. You could do clear timeout. You could clean up your DOM elements. So some DOM elements that you might have changed in component did mount. So these are all the different methods that we have. So let's just dig into the live coding, the interesting parts. Okay, if you are interested in having the code, having access to the code for yourself, here in apps folder you could see the Next.js app. Before I show you the application, I'm going to show you there is I have used a tool called NextJS. Next.js is something that could help us develop React applications really, really fast. All you should do is just to first set up a folder, npm init to create your package.json, then install the next using npm install next -- save, and then create a folder called pages, and just copy and paste this piece of code. Then you are going to have an application, and all you have to do is just to add this to your package.json and run your application. What it does actually, it uses React and Babel and all the great technologies that we usually set up all by ourselves. It does this out of the box. We don't have to set up a Webpack, we don't have to set up Babel. It is just a feature out of the box using Next.js. One of the greatest features using Next.js is it allows a really awesome way of handling routes, and also because instead of creating routes here, you could use the file system as the API for your routes. If you create a file name, for instance, about.js, that about.js is going to be considered your route. And I'm going to show you right here, right now. This is my code. Inside the apps folder, you could see the Next.js app. Inside the pages folder, I have three files. The first one is index.js, which is the function that I have used for my home page. The second one is episodes, and about the user interface is a mess. Sorry about that. I haven't had enough time to use something like Bootstrap or a better platform to make it pretty, but I thought it's much better to care about functionality. So let's just take a look inside this code. Whatever you return here, this is going to be your component address route. Index.js is the home. Okay, let's just run the application. npm run dev. Oh, sorry, I have to go inside this process. Okay. Great. Now we have our application right here in localhost 3000. If you open localhost 3000, so okay, the building process hasn't just, I guess, finished. Okay. Now we have this. As I said, as you can see here, the user interface is not that good, but what you see at the top of the page, home, episode, about, it's just, let's say it is the navigation part. It could be much prettier, but and this is the home page. Let's just again review these. Before I do that, I want to show you the code, components, workshops page, index.js. This is the component that we are going to spend more time on it in this session to discover how lifecycle methods are actually working. Okay. Let's start reading the code. Okay, because I didn't want to spend time to create some kind of RESTful API, what I did, I just created a JSON file which has just a markdown JSON array of, for instance, workshop episode with one single attribute name. And I have just imported the JSON file as opposed to creating the RESTful API and calling that API. But okay, yeah, this is the component. So the first thing that we have here, as I said before, static properties. Prior to ES6, we had to create a function called getDefaultProps. Now, instead of creating that function, what we could do is just to create a property called defaultProps. But that property should be static. When we say a property is static, it means that using this keyword, you cannot have access to that component. It's just something like this. If you, when you use static keyword in ES6, it's like adding the default props, like default props dot something dot, excuse me, workshop page dot default props equals something. Then that function is going to be, and that object is going to be a static property. So instead of doing that, I have used static syntax. Okay, let's just take a look inside that. We will have a title property, and the default value of title is React Workshops, and we have an episodes array, and the default value of that is an empty array. Okay, when the initialization process, when we use ES6, is just to load the static properties, and at this point we only have one. We used to have two prior to ES6. when we had to create a get initial state for them to define the default state attributes as well. But now, using constructors, we could set up the initial state, so we no longer have to create that initial state anymore. Okay, sorry, let me just reformat the code. Okay, so inside the constructor, what I'm doing here, if you want to have props in your code, what you should do, you should pass the props to your super. But if you just don't create the constructor, you're going to have the props in your this keyword, and you know, like this, for instance, this.props. But if you just create the constructor but don't call super, then as you see, it says missed superclass constructor. Or if you call super without props, again, it is going to cause some issues, because you are not going to have access to props like this in other parts of your components.